please join me in warmly welcoming Charles Eisenstein.
Really good to see you again, Tyler, and the rest of you. But I have a vivid memory of Tyler. He lived with us for a little while in our house, and I have a little bit much there. Have a vivid memory of him. Our son, Carrie, was maybe 2 or 3 years old, singing The Cat in the Hat to him and accompanying himself on the guitar. I don't think Carrie remembers that, but I'm sure it made an imprint. Yeah. So I'm talking today about building a peace narrative. And the word narrative is bandied about a lot today, so that it's almost become a cliche. But I think a lot in terms of narrative, because the stories that we tell ourselves and about the world are what can organize us and cohere us toward a common purpose. Because a lot of the things that we need to do today don't make sense if you're the only one doing them. But if there's a story about the world that we want to create, then we kind of understand that, yeah, I'm doing my part, and it makes sense as part of this larger happening. Now, maybe this larger happening is something bigger than any story that we could make about it. But for me, the story that allows me to make meaning of my life and allows me to identify my allies and allows me to understand what my role is in this bigger happening is essential. So this understanding of narrative extends to all parts of the political spectrum. Adolf Hitler understood narrative very well and was very successful in creating a narrative of racial superiority and so on and so forth that allowed the German people to identify themselves and the role they played in wreaking tremendous suffering on Earth. So it's important, if we want to serve a world of peace and well-being for all people, a world of healing, where society and all the beings on this planet are moving toward greater wholeness, we better make sure that we're telling the right story. Today, the dominant narrative, whether we recognize it or not, is a war narrative. Not only on the obvious level of US foreign policy, identifying enemies around the world and bombing them, but also in our basic understanding of how the world works and how to solve problems. War thinking is woven so deeply into our psyche that if we want to build a peace narrative on a foundation of peace, maybe we need to identify the existing foundation of our narratives, which is a war narrative. So I want to spend a little time unearthing, excavating and removing the war narrative so that, and then I'm going to say maybe a bit about the foundations of a peace narrative, and then I'll move on to the building components and the architecture of a peace narrative. So in preparing for this lecture, I read a beautiful essay by the Christian theologian Walter Wink called The Myth of Redemptive Violence. Redemptive violence basically being the idea that the way to make a better world is to destroy something, to kill something, to kill evil, to extirpate evil, to overcome the forces of evil and chaos with the forces of good and order. He traces it back to a Babylonian creation myth, over 3,000 years old, where originally you had the god Adsu and the goddess Tiamat. And there they were all by themselves, and so they got bored, and so they decided to have kids. And they had a whole bunch of kids, but it wasn't long before they kind of regretted it. Because the kids were making too much noise. That's what it says in the myth, basically. And so they decided, of course, that they were going to kill all their children. Right? Problem solved. So, I mean, maybe if you're a god, you're allowed to do this. But they did. Anyway, the children got wind of this, and they decided that they would solve the problem by killing their parents. And so first they finished off Adsu. That wasn't too hard. But Tiamat, that was a different story. None of them dared to face Tiamat until the youngest of the children, Marduk, volunteered. I will destroy Tiamat, our mother, on condition that you all, brothers and sisters, you all make me the supreme ruler of the universe. So I'll leave it to your imagination to draw parallels to US foreign policy and stuff. But I'll just say, so okay, Marduk then, he comes up with a plan. He blows poison gas into the stomach of Tiamat, stabs her with a spear, and she explodes. All her guts and blood spew out. And from her body parts, he constructs the world that we live in today. So this creation myth basically comes through the misogynistic killing of the Great Mother, and who is identified with chaos and the wild. And truly, in these ancient civilizations, good was associated with order. The king was the incarnation of good, conquering the beasts, killing the lions, cutting down the forests. That goes back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, cutting down the forests, bringing civilization to the barbarians, bringing domestication to the wild. And you could see maybe even today that we're kind of doing the same thing, taking the pieces of a ruined Gaia and building our civilization out of them, building the world out of the destroyed mother. So this is one of the roots of the war narrative that so immerses us today. I would trace it back maybe even deeper. I just mentioned the ancient civilizations where good was associated with order and conquest. It also extends to the basic metaphysics that we live in today, which is called science, or which is embedded in science, that essentially says that the tendency of the universe is toward entropy. It's toward disorder. And it is only by imposing our design onto this chaotic, disorderly, and degenerating universe that we are able to maintain a realm fit for human habitation, that we are able to impose good upon chaos. So if you accept that, and if you accept that nature itself does not have any inherent intelligence, any inherent tendency toward complexity, toward the emergence of beauty and organization, if you accept that, then we are fundamentally at war with nature all the time, subject at any moment to being extinguished by random natural forces. And so our well-being in that view comes through imposing more and more control on this wild, arbitrary, random nature that is outside of ourselves. So this is another kind of war thinking that you can see is really resonant with the fight against the enemy in other ways. And it comes up in pretty much any realm of human endeavor that is part of civilization. So for example, it's a problem-solving template that goes as follows. First, identify the cause of the problem, the culprit, the perpetrator. Then, control, imprison, keep away or kill, humiliate, destroy the bad guy, the culprit, the cause, and then all will be well. And the better able we are to do this, the better human life is going to be. Walter Wink gives the example of Popeye, Popeye the Sailor, which the plot in every episode is the same. Brutus goes and kidnaps Olive Oyl, and Popeye tries to rescue her and is beaten to a pulp by Brutus. And then at the last minute, he pops a can of spinach, and he gets really strong, and then he beats Brutus to a pulp just before he can rape Olive Oyl. That's the plot of Popeye. Nobody, and he points out, nobody ever learns anything from this encounter. Nobody grows in it. And the lesson is that the way to solve a problem is to overcome the enemy with force. So you can see this not only in obvious ways, I mean, that's the mentality of war, but also in agriculture. So if you have a problem, like your crop yields are declining, you identify the cause. There's weeds in the field, and the solution is to kill the weeds. Or maybe you're getting strep throat, and what's the cause? Let's find the pathogen. That's the orientation. Find the pathogen. Streptococcus bacteria. Solution, antibiotics, kill it. Maybe a problem is crime. Well, obviously crime is caused by criminals, right? So if we lock up the criminals, then we won't have any more crime. Terrorism, obviously it's caused by terrorists. So let's kill the terrorists. No more terrorism, problem solved. So you can see how, or even if you're trying to be a better person, or you want to be more effective in the world, and you're procrastinating, and you're lazy and you're addicted to something. Well, here's the bad guy to attack. Here's something to control. Maybe you're overweight and you think, oh, it's because I'm eating too much. So that's the cause. The bad guy is the calories. The solution is to control that. So this war thinking is nearly universal. The war on the other and the war on the self, too. Because there's a sneaking suspicion that you're one of the bad guys. In fact, this is an explicit teaching of biology and economics, at least up until quite recently, where it was believed that behavior, human and otherwise, is motivated by reproductive self-interest. Your genes, that's built into you. And in order to be anything other than ruthlessly selfish, you have to overcome nature. So there's a war mentality also. Now, you can see the problem here when we are waging a war on symptoms, on weeds, criminals, terrorists, calories, overeating, and so forth, which is that if these are not actually the cause, but they themselves are a symptom, then the true cause is going unexamined and unchanged. Like, why does Brutus want to kidnap Olive Oyl? If you don't unearth that, then you're going to be fighting Brutus all the time. Why are the weeds growing in the field? Once you ask that question, then war thinking no longer gives you the answers. And it might be because there's a lack of biodiversity in the field, or that the soil is depleted in some way, and those weeds are coming actually to repair the soil, because there's an intelligence in nature. Why is there crime? Is it because those criminals are just bad? Or are they acting from the totality of their circumstances? Are there economic reasons? Are there reasons of a legacy of institutional racism? A loss of meaning in life? So war thinking is, in all cases, a simplifying and reducing narrative. In fact, to wage war, you pretty much have to reduce the enemy. You have to dehumanize the enemy. It's a universal tactic in war to make them, make them less than fully human. If you want to kill somebody, that is a key enabling method. If you want to exploit somebody. As war thinking infiltrates our political culture, I'm seeing more and more of that, dehumanizing or demonizing the other side and constructing narratives that serve the dehumanization of the other side. And this comes up all the time in political discourse. The thought and the statement, how could they? It's totally unjustified to accuse our opponents of some deficiency in their core humanness. They're stupid. They're ignorant. They're immoral. They're entitled. They're greedy. Those greedy corporate executives. And then this narrative gets weaponized because we then use it to arouse the indignation of our side, to stir up, to incite war fever so that we can rise up and destroy those bad guys. I was recently on a podcast where speaking about the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, speaking about ecological healing, regenerative agriculture, and things like that, which has been a major theme for me in the last year. And the interviewer said, well, Charles, what would you say to this? The power elite, they're never going to change. They're benefiting from this. They're happy with this, and they're not going to change. So in order to change them, we're going to have to somehow bring them down. We're going to have to rise up in bloody revolution and make them change because they're not going to change. So let's first assume that that's true. If that's true, then our hope lies in overcoming them by force, because they're not going to change by themselves. They like it this way. They're the enemy. They're the bad guy. We have the formula for creating change when there's a bad guy. It's in all the movies. It's not just Popeye. It's in Batman. It's in The Lion King. It's in pretty much every action movie you've ever seen. It's in Star Wars. You kill Darth Vader. You kill the Emperor. You destroy evil. And that's kind of unrealistic. If it comes to a contest of force, who has more force? Who has more military power? Is it us hippies and peaceniks? Or is it Tyler? I mean, he does have an intimidating presence, but still. Or is it the military, industrial, pharmaceutical, medical, educational, NGO, prison, industrial complex? Did I leave some out? Yeah, financial. They have the guns. They have the money. They have the surveillance state. They have the police. They have the control of the media. So if it comes down to a contest of force, they're going to win. In fact, even if we talk about the force of propaganda and the force of a narrative, and we try to ignite the rage and indignation of the oppressed against them, guess what? They are even more adept at manipulating narratives and making you look bad because they control the media. They're doing it right now, creating narratives that are more ubiquitous and have a farther reach and more PR, advertising energy behind them, more money behind them than yours do. So this is probably a recipe for failure unless you become so good at the technologies of war that you do tear them down. You do defeat the bad guys, and now you're in power. And the fight hasn't ended. There's still bad guys out there. And in order to defeat those bad guys, you need to consolidate your power. Because you know the world is going to be better if you do that. George Orwell described this very, very clearly in 1984. The goal of the party is power. The justification is that they're going to create a perfect world. And in order to do that, they have to have complete power. What is power? Power is the ability to make others suffer. So you end up becoming evil yourself. You end up, because part of the technology is to demonize the enemy and not let anything into the narrative that is going to humanize the enemy. That does not serve the war effort. To let in something that maybe it's true, but it's going to make Donald Trump look good. So I better not endorse a single thing that he's done, which actually, sometimes it seems kind of hard to find, but you know, you see the same thing play out in a fighting couple, a divorcing couple. And if one of them comes to you and he's your friend, and first she did this and then she did that, and can you believe it? And how could she? And what they want is for you to endorse that narrative. You're not going to say, well, you know, she actually did da 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 da. Like, that doesn't serve the war. So 2 scenarios. Either one is that you lose. That's the most likely, and that's why so many activists fall into despair, because the powers are too great. Or you win, which is the same. Yeah, the science fiction writer Philip K. Dick put it really well in Valis. At one point he wrote, to defeat the empire, no, let me start again. To fight the empire is to be infected with its derangement. This is a paradox. Whoever defeats a segment of the empire becomes the empire. It proliferates like a virus, imposing its form on its enemies. Thereby, it becomes its enemies. So if you go to war against war, if you go to war against the empire, you have actually become part of the empire. And George Orwell illustrated this too. When, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the book, but the main character, Winston, he gets recruited into or he thinks he's being recruited into the resistance. And it's actually, he's actually being entrapped, but he thinks he's being recruited into the resistance, and he's asked, you know, how committed are you to overthrowing the party? Would you be willing to do anything? Would you be willing to commit sabotage? Would you be willing to commit mass murder? If it served the overthrow of the party, would you be willing to throw acid in a child's face? And he says yes. And therefore, he is revealed as actually having the same mindset as the party, to do anything to gain power, to do anything to overthrow evil. So this illustrates, well, it leads me to offer a general principle that in any fight, and more of our political discourse has become a fight, in any fight where there's 2 sides opposing each other, pushing each other, fighting with each other, the resolution lies in the things that are hidden by the fight, the things that both sides agree on without even knowing it, and the questions that neither side is asking. So, for example, in the fight over immigration, one side is very much in the war thinking, keep them out, keep the bad immigrants out. Immigration is harming us, and let's keep them out. The other side is like, that's really inhumane, we're separating families, we should welcome people. Nobody's asking. In the dominant culture, nobody's asking, why are there so many immigrants? What has made life in Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and so forth, so unbearable that people are willing to risk their lives and leave their homes and leave their families, risk their children's lives for a totally uncertain future. What would it take for you to do that? It's an uncomfortable question. First, because it takes us outside of the familiar war paradigm of problem solving. When we're accustomed to that, we want to find, like, if all you have is a hammer, you look for nails. And you start to see things that aren't nails as nails, because here's your tool. So it's uncomfortable in that way, because we don't know what to do anymore. And secondly, the answer to that question of why they're immigrating has to do with ourselves. So no enemy anymore to fight, because we're kind of we're involved in it. We're all in this together, you could say. And that's really uncomfortable. If you are a pacifist or a peacemaker, you may find that you arouse a lot of hostility from both sides of a conflict. When you gain your identity and your sense of being a good person from being on team good in the war against team evil, then you actually need team evil. You need the other side. That props up. It's like, two cards leaning against each other and keeping each other up. You need team evil to validate your identity. The pacifist challenges the identity of both sides and arouses more hostility than the enemy does. Pacifists are more hated, more despised than the enemy. Okay, so I don't want to take too much time talking about the war narrative, because I want to talk about the of a peace narrative. But just to say, I've just been illustrating how deep it goes and how pervasive it is. I mean, it goes all the way down to cosmology, to physics. And I would say it's obsolete physics. This has become clear with the discovery and research on emergence, self-organizing systems, which are ubiquitous in nature. The world actually has a tendency toward order, toward beauty, as if there were an intelligence in all things. It's obsolete biology, the selfish gene. Symbiosis, cooperation, the merger of individuals into greater and greater and greater wholes, an ascent of complexity. That's how biology works. Genes, well, okay, I'm not going to go too much into that. In fact, not at all. But there's a neo-Lamarckian resurgence that in biology that, okay, I'm not going to even go there. But I'm just going to say, but it is part of a peace narrative, that nature is not one gigantic war of each against all, as Rudolf Steiner put it, but that cooperation and symbiosis are evolutionary forces as well. So I said before that, so now I want to lay a little bit of a foundation of a peace narrative. So I said before that the essence of war is reduction. The reduction of the universe of life to thing, for example. The reduction of other people to enemy. The simplification of complexity so that there is a thing to fight. Well, therefore, if we want to build a peace narrative, the first foundational pillar would be holistic thinking. To understand that everything is intimately related to everything else, that everything is a part of everything else. To use a Buddhist terminology, a Buddhist term, that to exist is to be in relationship, that we are not separate individuals, but we are interdependent for our very existence, that we are interexistent. Therefore, anything that we see as an enemy is a reflection of something in ourselves and is the product of a constellation of relationships. From that place, we seek to understand the relationships. So if you are getting strep throat a lot, you seek to understand, well, how is the bacteria part of my body ecology? What are the conditions? What are the totality of the relationships that have brought this symptom into visibility? And in fact, it could be because of a disruption in body ecology, because if you're healthy, you have these friendly bacteria that secrete substances that suppress the pathogenic bacteria. If you take a lot of antibiotics, then you're killing off the friendly bacteria in your mucous membranes, leaving you more susceptible. It's like when you bomb the terrorists, you create conditions for even more terror to grow. When you lock up the criminals and destroy families and destroy communities, you're creating conditions that breed even more crime. Same principle here. And when you look through a holistic lens, through the lens of interdependency and interrelationship, then these base conditions that breed all of the things we go to war against become visible. And we no longer then default to fighting something. And I want to say, just before I move on to the second pillar, that I'm not maintaining here that there's never a time to fight something, that there's never a time to use antibiotics, that there's never a time maybe to like maybe you theoretically know that this person is about to beat your child because he suffered childhood trauma himself and so forth, but maybe in this moment that doesn't help you. And your only response that you can see is to intervene forcefully. The problem is when we, instead of waiting till we've tried everything else, we default to a fight first because we're so used to seeing the world in terms of good and evil. So a fight becomes the default, the reflexive response. When we can understand the conditions that generate the behavior that we are fighting against, then there are other options. The option of changing those conditions. This leads to the second pillar, which I'll call compassion. Compassion comes from, so it's not like the superior person indulgently, patronizingly tolerating or sympathizing with the condition of the inferior person. Compassion is basically feeling what it's like to be somebody else. The experience of identifying with somebody else and knowing what it's like to be them. It comes from the question, what is it like to be you? What are the conditions that have made you into who you are? And how can I participate in the evolution of those conditions? To see these conditions, for most people growing up in this society, it requires some deprogramming. Deprogramming from condemnation, from which side are you on, from judgment. Judgment, in the sense that I mean judgment is, if I were you, I wouldn't have done that. I'm better than you. Or maybe I'm worse than you. Usually it's I'm better than you. I wouldn't have done that. I had a former colleague, I was talking about this stuff and how, the stuff about the conditions for crime and understanding, that crime is a symptom of something else. And she was like, yeah, but that's not true for the white supremacists. I can understand why some, black kid who grew up in the ghetto would turn to crime when there's no other economic opportunities and he's been traumatized and stuff. But those white supremacists, look at those guys. with their bellies hanging out over their belts, in their t-shirts and their hats, so entitled, they've got no excuse to be the way that they are. We're just waiting for someone to hate, aren't we? Here's the enemy. Here's someone where we can let loose and define ourselves as good. I saw a few years ago there was this biker gang riot in Texas where they, were rival gangs, started beating each other up. The police came, they started beating up the police. It was just like this horrendous violent incident. And on salonmagazine.com, there were the mugshots, or the photographs of these men who were involved in this incident. And they chose like the most contemptible, unflattering pictures you could imagine. And the subheadline should have been, here's someone you can hate. Here's the bad guy. And so we get these simplifying narratives where, like the problem of racism, it would sure be nice if it could be solved by just identifying the racists. If it were a matter of individual attitudes, bad people, but it's woven so much deeper into our society than that. That approach will not ever work. And it only results in strengthening the basic psychic template of racism, which is dehumanization. Racism is dehumanization. And it will not be solved by dehumanizing the racists. That might feel good. You get to be on team good. But is that what you are serving? Or are you serving the healing of racism? And are you willing to sacrifice identity of being on the moral, ethical, right side in order to serve healing on earth? This is the third pillar. The third pillar is to end the internal war and to develop a peace narrative inside of ourselves and to end the conflict that arises when we serve being right, when we serve establishing our identity as a good person. The best, easiest way to establish your identity as a good person is in contrast to the evil people. So are you willing to give that up? Are you willing to give up having been right all along? How much do you care about peace? It's said that you can only serve one master. You cannot serve two masters. Temporarily, you can. You can serve peace and at the same time serve getting the approval of your in-group. You can serve peace and at the same time serve your identity as a good person. You can serve peace and at the same time serve your goal of being heard, of being seen, of being recognized, of being seen as a leader, of believing yourself to be moral, of having a self-image like that. You can serve both for a while, but sometime, eventually, the generosity of the universe is such that you will reach a choice point where you get to decide what you really serve, and you then need to make a sacrifice. And this can be a bitter pill to swallow, you know. The strategy of war, so pervasive. Maybe you get upset about GMO seeds and Monsanto, which is now Bayer, vigorously spreading GMOs around the world, destroying peasant agriculture, corrupting entire governments to accept the next iteration of industrial agriculture, patenting seeds and varieties that were developed by indigenous cultures and so on, and okay, we got to stop this. How are we going to do it? Well, in the mentality of war, first thing we got to do is identify somebody as the bad guys, and it would be the Monsanto executives. Why are they doing that? How could they? If I were them, I wouldn't do that, would I? I wouldn't make those decisions. If I were a fracking executive, I wouldn't destroy and pollute the waters like that. All for what? For my greed? Can't believe those people. Let's arouse some hatred. Let's tear those fuckers down. That's the strategy. Imagine that you are a Monsanto executive. And here everybody is talking about how greedy you are, how horrible you are. And you're like, I walked my neighbor's dog when they're on vacation. I work really hard. My colleagues respect me. And I'm a fracking executive, maybe. I'm building America's energy independence. In their story, they're the good guys. And you seem ridiculous. You are, in fact, offering yourself as the bad guy by the way that you see them and relate to them. Well, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? I gave those two scenarios where you either get defeated by the military, industrial, et cetera complex, or you overcome them and become the new complex. What's the alternative? The alternative comes from different premises. The premise being that comes from an understanding of the situation that starts by asking, well, why is somebody greedy? Or why is somebody feeling so good about fracking? What story informs their belief system? And what state of being? Like, where does greed come from anyway? Greed is another one of those symptoms, just like strep. It's a symptom of an experience of scarcity. It's a hunger that can never be met by the objects that are offered to feed it. If somebody is cut off from community, cut off from nature, cut off from meaning in their lives, they're going to be hungry for that. And instead of that, what's offered is money, prestige, possessions, power. Okay, I'll take that. But if you can look at the person that you call an enemy and see in them that actually they want, on a deep level, they want what you want and what all people want. They want to contribute their gifts to a more beautiful world, to a healed world, that they want to be generous, that they are here for a purpose beyond themselves. If you can see that, then you're able to speak to that. Then you're able to create an invitation to that. One of my mottos is that the story that we hold about a person is an invitation for them to step into that story. Reminds me of the story of Julio Diaz, this guy in New York, maybe he was Puerto Rican origin, can't remember, but he takes the subway home every day, gets off a stop early in Queens or whatever to buy a burrito at his favorite burrito store, and then he walks home. And one day he gets off, he's going to the burrito store, and a mugger holds him up at knife point. Give me your wallet. Oh, okay. Gives him his wallet. And he says, hey, kid, it's cold out. Do you want my jacket too? And guys, what can he say? He's like, okay. Gives him his jacket. And he says, hey, I was about to go get a burrito. It's a really good burrito store. You want to come with me? Or what can you say? He comes with him. And then they're, at the counter, and he says, I would treat you to the burrito, but you've got my wallet. Can I have my wallet back? Gives him his wallet. Says, and give me the knife too. Gives him his knife. That would not have been possible if he had seen that teenager as a bad guy. But he was able, even with a knife in his face, he was able to see something else. That is the power of the stories that we hold about each other. They can generate miracles. Now, I'm not offering that as a formula. If someone holds you up, you can't say that unless you actually see it. And that takes practice. To see it, you have to look for it. To look for it, you have to be willing to put down the benefits you get from holding others as enemies or as lesser than, as other, as less conscious than you, less enlightened than you, less spiritual than you, less ethical than you. You have to be willing to put that down. And if you're going to see something else, you have to put down the judgments. Those are a cloud, a distorting cloud that reduces people to the image of the judgments and does not create an opportunity or an invitation for them to be anything else. So you have to be willing to put that down. And to put that down, how do you do that? Is that a fight against yourself? Is that an effort of will? No. That comes from understanding where those judgments come from. Like, why do we have such a need to establish ourselves as the good guys? That comes from a wound. It's the wound of self-rejection. And that wound also is part of war thinking. It's built into school, it's built into parenting, it's built into religion, it's also very ubiquitous in our culture. Anytime, if you're a parent, anytime you look at your child with contempt, why did you do that? How could you? You're basically conveying you're bad. And it's never an honest question. Why did you do that? It's usually, well, almost never. It's a condemnation. But if you made it an honest question, then you'd be getting somewhere. Why did you do that? Help me to understand. Because I know who you are. Help me to understand Monsanto executive. Help me to understand Donald Trump. Maybe you don't ask that person specifically, but that's the orientation. That's the looking for what Julio Diaz was able to see and then to be able to invite. So those are some foundations of a peace narrative. The building blocks, the construction components, those are things like stories. Stories that help people understand what it is like to be an immigrant, what it is like to be a racist, what it is like to be a corporate executive, what it is like to live in a ghetto. So many of our political stances would not be able to operate if we really knew what it was like to be somebody else. And these stories need to be presented in a way that they can be heard, not with a secret agenda of making you feel ashamed and humiliated of how much harm you've caused. That's another form of warfare. And I'm not... Shame and humiliation have a place. When you feel ashamed, your face flushes. Really what shame is, it's the breakdown of a self-image. It dissolves, and the chemical bonds, the psychic chemical bonds that held it together, they release heat, and they free up energy. And in order to go there and not just defend and hold that image together, boy, it really helps to know that you're loved. It helps to feel safe. And so these stories are so much more powerful when they're presented and held in a way where people feel safe to hear them, that you're not trying to attack them. And you trust them. You trust, I know it's hard for you to go through this humiliation. I'm here for you, my brother, my sister. I'm here for you. We're in this together. That's a peace narrative. We are in this together. Another component of building a peace narrative is our words and how we use them. A lot of the English language subtly, or not so subtly, suggests and facilitates dehumanization and war thinking. Words like inexcusable. Like, what do you actually mean by inexcusable? You mean, well, some bad actions have an excuse, they're justified. Justifiable is another one. And some just have no excuse. And if they have no excuse, you only did that because you're a bad person. So that would be an example of smuggling war thinking. Even if you're wielding those epithets of greedy and inexcusable and unjustifiable and evil, immoral, at the warmongers. But what you're really trying to do is to wage a war to end all war. We tried that already. It was called World War I. Yeah. So maybe say one more thing. I'm probably getting low on time. Yeah, this is not to be like the language police, because as any of you who have studied nonviolent communication know, the formula for NVC can be used very violently. It depends on the intention behind it. So you can, so I'm not like, like an agent of the PC word police, like extending the realm of my patrol to any word that might, humiliate somebody or make somebody feel bad or encourage a dehumanization of somebody. But the reason to point attention to these is to bring attention to the state of being and the state of perception that is underneath these words, to make us alert to how we carry war thinking within ourselves. And when we take note of that and heal the wounds, the wound of self-rejection, for example, the wound of alienation, of being cut off from community and nature and intimate participation in the material world and all these other forms of cutoff that we have undergone through trauma, when we begin to heal those and no longer see through the lens of enemies and good guys and bad guys, good and evil, right and wrong, then we no longer feels good to use those words. It feels inconsistent with who I am and who I want to become. So, so those are some of the building blocks. And then to use words, to use stories that foster understanding, that induce people to ask or to wonder or to consider, what is it like to be you? What are the conditions that generate the things that are hurting so much when I see them? War thinking, in a way, it's a way to maintain the status quo. Here's something that hurts. Here's something that outrages you. Here's an injustice that you see in the world. Police violence, incarceration, ecocide, the draining of a wetland, whatever it is. Here's something that hurts. And then war thinking takes that energy that could go to healing and diverts it onto something that only fights the symptoms. So I want to get serious about healing this world, participating in the healing of this world. So foundation pieces, I did that, building blocks, components, and then there's just the whole structure. And I'll just say one very short thing about that. It is the story of the world that, to quote myself, that our hearts know is possible. that we invite people into. It's a world where everybody has a place, where everybody is valued, where everybody can be welcomed and known to have a gift that is essential to make that world even richer, where nobody's left out. And again, as with Julio Diaz, to speak compellingly of that world, you have to have seen it. The story we hold about the world is an invitation for the world to enter that story too. We have to have seen it. And I would say probably everybody in this room has seen it. You have had a glimpse of what the world could be. That the world could be peaceful. That the power elite, the perpetrators, the military commanders, the politicians, the executives, that this isn't really working for them either. And that there's part of them that is willing to make the courageous choice to let go of something that was precious to them. But that now maybe they're starting to realize it's not so precious after all. So here we are, all gathered together, all having caught a glimpse, or many glimpses in our lives, of a world that we know is possible, and we don't know how to get there. The mind says it's not possible. Because what's the plan? The mind is immersed in, I've been calling it war thinking, but it's deeper than war thinking. It's force-based causality. How are you going to make it happen? That's a more subtle variation on war thinking. How are you going to make it happen? How are you going to exert a force on a mass? That's Newtonian physics. That's part of the old story of separation too. Well, we don't know. It's not going to, we don't have enough force and information to act precisely to make it happen. We're going to have to trust something else. We're going to have to trust that there is an intelligence in the world, greater than ourselves. There is an organic tendency or will toward organization and beauty and complexity that is unfathomably mysterious. So we don't know how it's going to happen. But we don't have to fight the world to make it happen. Instead, we start by listening. What is my part? How shall I be deployed? Where am I to be, and what is mine to do? What calls to my care? And from that place, maybe we become able to speak that world story, to speak that invitation, or maybe we just carry it in ourselves and act from it, from our knowledge of it, that in these gatherings we remind each other is real. Because you wouldn't be here if you hadn't seen it too. The very fact of this gathering stirs my optimism, reminds me I'm not crazy. You wouldn't be here, even if you come with loads of skepticism and despair. You're here. You still have hope. Life never dies. Living things die, but life itself always strives for more life. So I will end with this thank you for carrying that bit, that glimpse of a more beautiful world with you, so that we can weave a peace narrative around it. Yes. Thank you so much.